The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains of my bedroom, but its warmth couldn't pierce the cold darkness that had settled in my heart just a week ago. It was that single week ago when I received the news that would forever change my life. My parents, Raymond and Teresa Brown, had died in a tragic car accident near a coastal town. I finally managed to drag myself out of bed that morning, my eyes swollen from another night of endless tears. My husband, Hunter Williams, was already in the kitchen when I came down. He greeted me softly and held out a steaming cup of coffee, asking how I was feeling today. I took a sip of the coffee before answering, telling him that the world seemed to have lost all its color and I couldn't believe my parents were really gone. Hunter wrapped me in a tight embrace, and for a moment, I allowed myself to sink into his warmth. He whispered that he understood and reminded me that we were in this together, that we would get through this loss one step at a time. I nodded weakly, grateful for his constant support during these dark days. Little did I know then that this was just the beginning of an emotional roller coaster. That afternoon, we received a call from my parents' lawyer, Mr. Johnson, his voice solemn over the phone. He expressed his condolences and explained that while he knew this was a difficult time, there were important matters regarding my parents' estate that needed to be discussed, asking if we could meet at his office tomorrow. The thought of dealing with legal matters in the midst of my grief felt overwhelming, but I knew it was necessary. I agreed to the meeting, my voice barely steady as I spoke. The next morning, Hunter and I made our way to Mr. Johnson's office in the heart of downtown. The office building was imposing, its glass exterior reflecting the Capitol's blue sky like a mirror. As we rode the elevator up, Hunter held my hand, offering silent support. He whispered that everything would be all right, that he was there with me. Mr. Johnson greeted us with a sympathetic expression, a middle-aged man wearing thin-framed glasses and an impeccable suit. He thanked us for coming, his hands folded on the table as he acknowledged the difficulty of this timing before mentioning he had important information about my parents' estate. I nodded, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming, but nothing could have prepared me for what he said next. Mr. Johnson revealed that my parents owned a beach house in a coastal town, describing it as an extremely valuable property. I frowned, expressing my confusion as I'd never heard about any beach house. The lawyer nodded understandingly and explained that my parents had purchased it several years ago but kept it secret, intending it as a surprise. Tears welled up in my eyes at his words. Even after their death, my parents were still surprising me with their love and generosity. Hunter asked about the property's value, his voice tinged with curiosity. Mr. Johnson cleared his throat slightly before announcing that the property had recently been appraised at $242 million. The silence that followed his words was overwhelming, filling the room like a heavy fog. The air seemed to be sucked out of the room, and beside me, Hunter had gone completely still. I finally stammered out the words, asking if he had really said $242 million. Mr. Johnson solemnly nodded, confirming that this property was truly exceptional, situated in the most prestigious area of town, surrounded by gardens overlooking the ocean. He described it as an architectural masterpiece, equipped with every modern amenity imaginable. I looked at Hunter, desperately searching for something to anchor me to reality. His eyes were wide with shock and something else I couldn't quite read. "This is unbelievable," I finally managed to say, asking why they had never mentioned it. Mr. Johnson smiled gently, explaining that my parents had wanted it to be a surprise, they had been planning it. He then turned to us, explaining that everything was up to us now, the property was mine to sell, rent, or move into if we wished. In that moment, the idea of moving to this dream house by the sea pierced through my darkness like a ray of light. Suddenly, I saw an opportunity for a new beginning, a chance to step away from these painful memories. I turned to Hunter and suggested we move, thinking perhaps this was exactly what we needed. I saw a spark of excitement light up his eyes as he asked if I was serious, warning me it would be a big change. I nodded with determination, saying I was certain and that this must be what my parents had wanted for us, a fresh start. Mr. Johnson smiled and told us if that was our decision, he could start the necessary paperwork immediately, adding that the property was ready for immediate occupancy. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. We organized our life in the city, said goodbye to friends and family and arranged for work transfers. Fortunately, both Hunter and I could work remotely. As moving day approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety building inside me. Finally, the day arrived, and we loaded the last of our belongings into the car and set out for the coastal town. The 5-hour journey seemed endless, each mile bringing us closer to our new life. When we finally reached the address Mr. Johnson had provided, I gasped. The house was beyond anything I had imagined. A majestic Mediterranean-style building stood before us, its white walls striking against the deep blue of the sky and sea. Hunter whispered beside me in awe, saying it was absolutely incredible. We got out of the car and walked toward the entrance. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the lock and opened the door. The interior was like stepping into a dream. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, and panoramic windows overlooking the ocean. Every room was decorated with refined taste, perfectly balancing luxury with comfort. As we walked hand in hand through the house, I was hit by conflicting waves of emotion. Joy for this incredible gift, sadness that my parents couldn't share in this experience, and a new determination to honor their memory by living a full life in this magnificent place. That evening, Hunter and I sat on the terrace, watching the sunset over the ocean. The sky was painted in oranges and pinks, while the salt-scented breeze caressed our faces. Hunter intertwined his fingers with mine and asked how I was feeling. I took a deep breath before answering, telling him it felt surreal. That I felt incredibly blessed and grateful, yet somehow guilty, wondering if we deserved something this magnificent. Hunter pulled me close and gently kissed my forehead, saying this was what my parents had wanted for us, and the best way to honor them was to live fully and find happiness here. I nodded, comforted by his words, but admitted that everything had changed so quickly. Just a month ago, we'd been living our normal life in the city, and now. Hunter finished my thought, saying we were starting a new chapter, together. That night, lying in our luxurious new bed, staring up at the intricately decorated ceiling, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. This house, this fresh start was a precious gift, but something inside me whispered a warning. That big changes often brought unexpected challenges. I had no idea then how prophetic that thought would be. The peace and quiet of our first days in the coastal town would soon be interrupted in the most unexpected and unsettling way. As I drifted off to sleep that night, lulled by the distant sound of waves, I couldn't have known that this newly found paradise would become a battleground, testing not just our marriage, but my own strength and resolve. My parents' unexpected inheritance had led us into a world of luxury and possibility, but it had also opened a Pandora's box of threats. Yet in that moment, I felt only gratitude and hope. Gratitude for my parents' final gift, and hope for the bright future Hunter and I would build in this dream house. Our first week in the new coastal home passed like a dream. Hunter and I explored every corner of the house, marveling at the luxurious details and spectacular ocean views. Waking up each morning to the gentle sound of waves and the salty sea breeze made it feel like we'd finally found our paradise. But fate had other plans for us. On Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after our arrival, I was jolted awake by a thunderous noise from the front door. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding. I called out for Hunter, but he was no longer beside me. Confused and anxious, I threw on my bathrobe and rushed out of the room. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze at the sight before me. The front door was wide open, and people were streaming in with suitcases and bags as if they owned the place. Leading this unexpected invasion was a familiar figure. Ellen, my mother-in-law. He explained that I knew what his mother was like. Once she decided on something, there was no stopping her, adding that it would only be for a short while and they'd get bored and leave soon enough. Though I wanted to scream and throw them all out, I held back. Instead, I took a deep breath and told him I understood, but this couldn't go on for long, and we needed to discuss it later. The next few days were complete chaos. The peace and quiet we had enjoyed vanished entirely. Our once luxurious sanctuary had turned into a noisy, chaotic campground. Children ran through the halls screaming and laughing while adults commandeered the pool and private spaces. Loud music and barbecue smells filled the house, with empty wine bottles and dirty dishes appearing everywhere. I tried to keep the house in order, but it was a losing battle. Each time I finished cleaning one room, new chaos erupted in another. Meanwhile, Ellen elegantly presided over the chaos with a champagne glass in hand and a condescending smile. Every time she saw me cleaning, she'd tell me not to feel so stressed, to relax and enjoy myself since this was a vacation. But for me, this wasn't a vacation. It was a nightmare. One afternoon, while trying to work on my laptop in the study, the only room that had escaped invasion, I overheard a chilling conversation. I heard Hunter's sister Alexa commenting on how wonderful the house was, saying she couldn't believe how lucky I was and imagining living here year-round. Ellen's voice responded, saying no one could know what might happen, that things change, and soon the house might have new owners. I froze, wondering what those words meant. Before I could hear more, their voices faded into the house's general chaos. That night, when Hunter and I finally retreated to our bedroom, the only space we still had to ourselves, I exploded. I told him I couldn't take it anymore, my voice shaking with uncontrollable irritation. 2 weeks had passed, and they showed no signs of leaving, reminding him this was our house, not a hotel for the entire family. Hunter sighed and avoided my eyes, saying he understood and promising to talk to his mother tomorrow. But nothing changed the next day, or the day after that. Every time I asked Hunter if he'd spoken to his mother, he'd make excuses. He was busy, the timing wasn't right, tomorrow would be better. Meanwhile, the situation kept getting worse. Small changes started appearing around the house. The paintings I had carefully chosen disappeared, replaced by Hunter's family photos. My books were cleared from the shelves, replaced by Ellen's collection of kitschy souvenirs and porcelain figurines. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find Ellen giving instructions to an unfamiliar woman. When I asked who she was, Ellen answered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, introducing her as Erin, our new housekeeper, saying she thought we needed help since I seemed overwhelmed lately. Anger boiled inside me. I confronted Ellen, telling her it was unacceptable to hire staff without consulting us, reminding her that this was our house. Ellen's smile turned cold as she patronizingly told me we were family, that families help each other, and that I clearly couldn't manage such a large house alone. I was about to scream when Hunter walked into the kitchen, asking what was going on. Before I could speak, Ellen smoothly answered that it was nothing, just introducing me to our new housekeeper, adding how wonderful it would be for me to have help and be able to relax. I felt something break inside me as I watched Hunter accept his mother's explanation without question. Where was the man I had married, the one who had always been on my side? That night, lying sleepless in our bedroom, I could hear laughter and conversation floating up from downstairs. Hunter's family was having another all-night party, acting as if they owned the place. I looked at Hunter sleeping peacefully beside me and felt something close to jealousy. How could he sleep so soundly while our life was falling apart? In that moment, I made a decision. If Hunter wouldn't handle this situation, I would have to take control myself. I was done letting them take over my parents' final gift and feeling like a stranger in my own home. I promised myself that tomorrow, things would change. I didn't know how yet, but I was determined to reclaim my life and my home. I closed my eyes, steeling myself for the battle ahead. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. Our once peaceful sanctuary now vibrated with the sounds of laughter and music from below. Hunter slept deeply beside me, seemingly oblivious to the chaos. After hours of tossing and turning, I needed fresh air. I carefully slipped out of bed, not wanting to wake Hunter, and put on my silk robe. I quietly left the room, making sure my bare feet made no sound on the cold marble floors as I descended the stairs. As I approached the ground floor, the party sounds gradually died down. It seemed most of the family had finally gone to bed. I headed toward the kitchen, thinking I'd make some tea to calm my nerves. But as I approached, I heard low voices speaking. I stopped, immediately recognizing Hunter's voice. When had he come downstairs? He was supposed to be sound asleep in bed. I heard him whisper to his mother that their plan was working perfectly and tomorrow they'd move to the next phase. My heart skipped a beat. Plan? What plan? I crept closer to the door gap, carefully positioning myself to listen without making a sound. Ellen's satisfied voice replied that I was just as expected and asked Hunter if that foolish tailor suspected anything. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Foolish? No, she hasn't noticed, Hunter replied, though guilt tinged his voice. He hesitated, asking his mother if this was really necessary, reminding her that I was his wife. Ellen let out a contemptuous sigh, telling her dear boy that we'd already discussed this. That I wasn't worthy of him or this property. She sneered that my parents hadn't worked for this house. It was just luck, and now, thanks to Hunter marrying me, they had a chance to make it theirs. I had to stifle a gasp, covering my mouth with my hand. Make it theirs? Were they trying to steal my inheritance? Hunter sighed, saying he knew but sometimes felt guilty about deceiving me. Don't be weak, son, Ellen snapped harshly. She reminded him why they were doing this. Once they controlled the house, they could sell it and split the money among the family, allowing everyone to live like royalty. After a pause, Hunter agreed, asking about the next phase. Ellen explained they would increase the pressure tomorrow. She would make my life hell while Hunter continued playing the role of concerned but ineffective husband. They would gradually wear me down until I couldn't take it anymore and left on my own. When Hunter asked what would happen if that didn't work, there was a moment of silence. Ellen's voice turned ice cold as she mentioned having contacts who could arrange an accident if necessary. I felt my world crumbling around me. The man I had loved, whom I'd planned to spend my life with, was conspiring with his mother to betray me. And worse, if their initial plan failed, they were considering harming me. My heart was beating so fast I feared they might hear it. I quietly backed away from the kitchen door and crept up the stairs as silently as I could, my mind swirling with emotions. Back in the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying desperately to process what I'd just heard. How had it come to this? How had I not seen this side of the man who slept beside me every night? I looked at Hunter, who had returned to bed without noticing my absence, sleeping peacefully. How could he sleep so soundly after plotting to take everything from me? Tears rolled silently down my cheeks. I felt betrayed, used, and completely alone. For a moment, I considered waking him up and demanding answers, but something held me back. Confronting them now would mean losing my only weapon, the element of surprise. I made my decision, they couldn't know that I knew everything. I needed time to think clearly and plan my next move. If they were going to play dirty, then I would have to fight back. I spent the rest of the night wide awake. My mind kept replaying events from the past few months, searching for signs I might have missed. When had this all started? Had our entire marriage been a lie, an elaborate scheme to get my parents' fortune? By the time morning light began filtering through the curtains, I had reached a decision. I would not be the victim in this story. I absolutely refused to let them take the only thing my parents had left me. I was going to fight, with everything I had. First, I needed an ally. It was clear I couldn't trust anyone in Hunter's family. But maybe my parents' lawyer, Mr. Johnson, would help me. He knew all the legal details about my inheritance. If anyone would help me protect my rights, it would be him. With this thought in mind, I got out of bed. Just then, Hunter began to stir. He looked at me through sleepy eyes, with what I now saw as a calculating, false smile. He whispered good morning, asking if I'd slept well. Desperate to hide the storm inside me, I forced a smile and lied, saying I had. I told him I was going to take a shower. In the bathroom, as hot water poured over me, I prayed it would wash away the feeling of betrayal. At the same time, I began forming a plan. First, contact Mr. Johnson. I needed an excuse to leave the house without arousing suspicion. Shopping might work. When I left the bathroom, Hunter was already gone. I could hear his family's chaos from downstairs. Another day of manipulation and chaos was beginning. I quickly got dressed and headed downstairs, steeling myself to face my enemies. In the kitchen, Ellen was already giving orders as if she owned the place. She greeted me with false sweetness, saying they'd just been talking about me and wanted to redecorate the living room, suggesting that my choice of curtains was too dull. I felt anger boiling inside but managed to keep my composure. With a forced smile, I told her I had plans to go shopping in town today. I didn't miss the flash of displeasure in Ellen's eyes as she suggested I should stay with family instead, adding condescendingly that I should watch my spending. I gritted my teeth and swallowed my anger. How dare she lecture me about spending while they occupied my house living off my inheritance? With all the calmness I could muster, I thanked her for her concern but assured her I could manage my own finances and would be back for dinner. Before she could say more, I left the kitchen and headed for the garage. During the drive downtown, my mind kept racing. How had it come to this? Why hadn't I seen through these people sooner? I parked in front of Mr. Johnson's office and took several deep breaths. I needed to stay calm and explain the situation clearly. I needed his help. Mr. Johnson greeted me with a warm smile, but his expression turned concerned when he saw my distress. He asked if I was all right, and I collapsed into the chair in front of his desk. I told him no, I wasn't all right, I desperately needed his help. For the next hour, I told him everything, the family's invasion of the house, the conversation I'd overheard, and the hidden threats. Mr. Johnson listened without interruption, his expression growing grave. When I finished, he quietly told me this was an extremely serious situation. A conspiracy to steal my inheritance and possibly a threat to my safety. I felt immense relief at his words. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, I didn't feel completely alone. When I desperately asked what to do, he leaned forward with determined eyes. He explained we needed to legally protect my assets first, noting how fortunately my parents had been wise enough to set up trusts, but we needed additional protective measures. We spent the next few hours discussing legal strategies, safety measures, and next steps. By the time I left his office, I finally saw a glimmer of hope. Back at my car, I checked the time and my stomach churned at the thought of returning to the house full of traitors for dinner. But I had to, keeping my secret was my greatest weapon. On the drive back to what I'd once thought was my dream house, a new determination took hold of me. I was no longer the naive Taylor who had moved in weeks ago. I was a woman ready to fight tooth and nail to protect what was mine. Hunter, Ellen, and their greedy family had no idea what was coming. They thought I was some foolish puppet they could manipulate. They would soon learn how wrong they were. I pulled into the garage with a knowing smile. The battle was about to begin, and I was ready to win. The next morning dawned with a deceptive peacefulness. I woke before Hunter, as had become my habit since discovering his betrayal. I watched him sleep for a while, trying to reconcile his innocent sleeping face with the conspirator I'd heard last night. How could he look so pure? I quietly slipped out of bed and prepared for the day. Today we would begin implementing the plan Mr. Johnson and I had devised. I needed to be careful, cunning, and above all, calm. I went down to the kitchen, hoping it would be empty this early. To my surprise, Ellen was already there, giving instructions to the new housekeeper. She greeted me with her usual false sweetness, commenting on how nice it was to see me up early and mentioning her plans to redecorate, saying the living room paintings were too ordinary. I felt anger rising but suppressed it, maintaining my composure. I forced a smile and thanked her for the suggestion, but told her I had plans today. Ellen's brows furrowed as she asked what plans could be more important than spending time with family. Before I could answer, a loud crash echoed through the house. It sounded like something breaking. We exchanged startled looks and ran toward the sound. When I reached the living room, I froze in horror. Ellen's family members were throwing my belongings out the window into the yard. My books, mementos, and even photos of my parents were being callously tossed away. I screamed, asking what they were doing, unable to contain my anger. Ellen turned around with a cold smile, saying they were just doing some spring cleaning, suggesting the house needed a change of image. Blind with rage, weeks of frustration and pain exploding at once, I lunged toward Ellen. I was ready to stop this with my own hands if necessary. But before I could reach her, strong arms grabbed me. It was Hunter who had appeared out of nowhere. He whispered in my ear to calm down, telling me not to make a scene. I struggled in his arms, shouting back at him, asking how he could tell me not to make a scene when his mother was destroying our house. Hunter slowly released me, his face wearing a mask of false concern. He told me I was overreacting, that his mother was just trying to improve the house. In that moment, witnessing the conspiracy between mother and son, something broke inside me. Weeks of pent-up tension, fear, and anger burst forth, and I suddenly started laughing hysterically. Everyone in the room froze and stared at me, their eyes mixing confusion with caution. My laughter echoed through the house, sounding almost unnatural amid the chaos. Through tears and laughter, I told them this was just perfect. They thought they could take everything from me. I asked if they really thought I was that foolish. I saw a flash of fear cross Ellen and Hunter's eyes. Clearly, this wasn't the reaction they'd expected. Hunter approached me cautiously, saying I needed to calm down, that I was acting strange. His words only made me laugh harder. I told him he had no idea what was happening. Still laughing, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. Everyone in the room stood frozen, watching me. I spoke into the phone, telling Mr. Johnson it was time to put our plan into action. Right now. I watched the color drain from Ellen's face. She asked in a shaking voice what plan I was talking about. I turned to her with a cold smile, asking if she thought she was the only one who could make plans. I told her, unfortunately for her, I'd been one step ahead the whole time. Just then, the doorbell rang. Everyone froze for a moment as I walked to the door. When I opened it, there stood Mr. Johnson with 2 police officers. He greeted me with a professional smile, telling me everything was ready. I nodded and invited them inside. The officers entered first, quickly surveying the destruction in the living room. Ellen's voice shook with rage and fear as she demanded to know why I'd called the police to this house. I repeated her words with bitter irony, telling her she was mistaken. This was my house, and they were merely trespassing. Mr. Johnson stepped forward holding a stack of papers. He turned to Ellen and explained that he had a court order prohibiting her and her family from remaining on the property. He requested their immediate departure. Hunter approached with a pale face, begging me to talk about this, insisting there must be some misunderstanding. I looked at him with cold, pained eyes, telling him there was nothing to discuss. I told him I'd heard everything. His plans to steal my inheritance, the threats. I watched understanding and fear spread across Hunter's face. When he tried to explain, I cut him off, saying his actions had spoken louder than any words could. The officers began walking through the house, ordering the other family members to leave. I watched Ellen's face contort with anger as she screamed that this was unforgivable, that we were family. I approached her and spoke in a low, cold voice, telling her they weren't family at all. I said family doesn't conspire to steal everything from you, doesn't threaten to hurt you when they can't get what they want. Ellen stepped back, startled by my intensity, and I saw real fear in her eyes for the first time. For the next hour, I quietly watched as the officers escorted everyone out. Some protested, some cried, but eventually they all left. Hunter was the last to go, casting one final pleading look at me before the door closed behind him. When the house finally fell silent, I collapsed where I stood among the broken picture frames and destroyed memories. It looked as though a storm had torn through my house. In an almost whisper, I asked what I should do now. Mr. Johnson looked at me with sympathetic eyes, telling me it was time to rebuild. This was my house, my life, and no one could take that from me. I slowly stood up, feeling as if years had passed in just these few hours. Walking to the window, I looked down at the yard scattered with my destroyed belongings. Among them was a cracked picture frame, but the photo inside was intact. I picked it up, carefully removing the broken glass. In the photo, my parents smiled at me, their faces full of love and pride. Tears rolled down my cheeks again, but this time they weren't tears of anger or sadness. They were tears of determination. I turned to Mr. Johnson and told him he was right. I would rebuild, and this time, I would do it my way. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. I hired cleaning crews, restored the house, and started divorce proceedings against Hunter. Each action empowered me, strengthening my sense of reclaiming my life. Sitting on the terrace, watching the sunset over the ocean. The house was quiet now, but this silence no longer felt oppressive. It symbolized peace and a new beginning. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and pink, I felt a serenity I hadn't experienced in weeks. I had faced betrayal, greed, and manipulation, and I had won. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I would need to deal with the emotional aftermath of Hunter's betrayal, rebuild trust, and learn to live on my own again. But for the first time in a while, I felt hope. This house and my parents' inheritance were no longer sources of conflict and pain. They had become symbols of my strength, my ability to face and overcome adversity. This was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. One I would write on my own terms. As the first stars began to shine in the night sky, I quietly raised a glass to my parents, grateful for their love and foresight in giving me this opportunity. And to myself, grateful for finding the strength to fight. To the future, with all its unknown possibilities. The battle had been fierce, but I had emerged victorious. And I was ready for whatever came next. The morning after the confrontation, a strange stillness hung over the house. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few weeks, almost tangible in its completeness. I woke up early as usual and went to the kitchen to make coffee. As I waited for the coffee maker to brew, I stared out the window at the yard. The evidence of destruction caused by Ellen and her family was still there. Scattered books, broken picture frames, damaged memories. I sighed deeply, steeling myself for the long day ahead. Just as I was about to sit down with my coffee, I heard a noise at the front door. My heart jumped, fearing Hunter or Ellen had returned to cause more trouble. I cautiously approached the door, ready to call the police if necessary. When I opened it, Ellen stood there, but not the authoritative, manipulative Ellen from before. She had dark circles under her eyes, disheveled hair, and looked exhausted. She spoke in a trembling voice, saying she wanted to talk. For a moment, I considered shutting the door in her face. After everything she'd done, what right did she have to ask for a conversation? But something in her expression made me pause. Her eyes held a desperation I'd never seen before. I coldly told her she had 5 minutes and let her in. She entered and saw the aftermath of the destruction she'd caused yesterday. She started to say something, then closed her mouth and silently followed me. In the kitchen, we sat at the table and I commanded her to speak. Ellen took a deep breath before starting. She admitted she knew she shouldn't be forgiven, that what they'd done, what she'd done, was unforgivable. But she wanted me to know the truth. I raised my eyebrows and looked at her skeptically, asking why the truth mattered now. She begged me to listen, saying if I wanted her never to return afterward, that would be fine. I gave a short nod for her to continue. In a whisper, she confessed that stealing my inheritance had been her idea. She said Hunter hadn't wanted to participate at first, but she had pushed and manipulated him. She closed her eyes, seeming finally crushed by the weight of her actions. She revealed they were on the brink of bankruptcy. Their family business had been struggling for years, she explained, and they'd been keeping up appearances. But they were really about to go under. I stared at her, processing this new information. I asked if she thought stealing my inheritance was the solution. I could see the tears rolling down Ellen's face as she spoke. I know I was wrong, she said, her voice shaky. I was desperate. I thought if I could get this property, I could sell it and save my family from ruin. But in the process, I became a monster. We sat there in silence for a while. I tried to absorb what she was telling me, but it was hard to process. Ellen seemed to be drowning in her own misery, her body slumped, her eyes hollow. Finally, I broke the silence. So where is Hunter in all this? Ellen looked up at me, her swollen eyes staring at me. Hunter is crushed, she whispered. He knows what he did. He knows he betrayed you. He wanted to come himself, but I thought it would be better if I spoke first. Just hearing his name made a wave of pain surge through my chest. I'd known everything, and yet, there was still a part of me that loved him. "Why are you telling me this now, Ellen?" "Because I can't bear this guilt anymore," she replied, her voice barely audible. "And because I thought you had a right to know the truth. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am truly sorry, Taylor. I really am." I stood up from the table, needing space, needing distance. I walked over to the window and looked out at the ocean, trying to sort through the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "Ellen," I finally said, not turning to face her. "I appreciate you coming here to tell me the truth. But it doesn't change what you and Hunter did. The fact that you conspired to steal from me made me feel like a stranger in my own home, destroyed my memories, none of that changes." "That's right," Ellen sobbed, cutting me off. "If you can't forgive us, I understand. I just wanted you to know the truth." I looked back at her, meeting her eyes with cold resolve. "So what do you want from me? Do you want me to save your family from ruin?" Ellen shook her head. "No, Taylor. I don't expect anything. You've suffered enough because of us. I just wanted to be honest, just once." We sat there in silence for what felt like forever. Finally, I made my decision. "Ellen, it's time for you to go. I need time to process all of this. I can't promise anything, but maybe we'll talk again someday." Ellen slowly stood, nodding. "I understand. Thank you for listening, Taylor. And I'm truly sorry." I silently walked her to the door, not saying a word. Just before she left, she turned back to me, her voice soft. "Taylor, please, talk to Hunter. He really loves you." That was all she said before she left. I was once again left alone, trapped in a whirlwind of confusion. The next few days were a blur of emotions and difficult decisions. I spent hours with Mr. Johnson, discussing the legal implications of everything that had happened. I also dug deep into Hunter's family's financial situation, making sure that Ellen's story checked out. A week after Ellen's visit, I made my decision and called Hunter over to the house. When he showed up, I was taken aback by his appearance. Like Ellen, he seemed to have aged years in just a few days. His eyes, which used to shine with life and energy, were now dull and sunken, dark circles under them. "Taylor," he said as soon as he saw me, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know where to begin." "Sit down, Hunter," I said, motioning to the sofa. "We have a lot to talk about." For the next few hours, Hunter shared his side of the story. He backed up Ellen's account of their financial struggles. He spoke of being torn between his loyalty to his mother and his love for me. "I know it doesn't excuse anything," he said, tears rolling down his face. "But what I did was unforgivable. I betrayed you in the worst possible way. But everything we shared, every moment we spent, every 'I love you' I told you, that was real. I love you, Taylor. And if you can't forgive me, I understand. But I want to spend the rest of my life making up for it, if you'll give me that chance." I sat in silence, staring at him. Inside, I was torn between the love I still felt for him and the pain of his betrayal. Finally, I spoke. "Hunter, what you did, what all of you did, hurt me deeply. I trusted you. I trusted your family. And you all used that trust to try and take everything from me." Hunter lowered his head, unable to meet my gaze. I kept my eyes on him as he avoided mine. "But I also understand the desperation that drives people to do terrible things," I continued. "And, despite everything, there's still a part of me that loves you." Hunter looked up at me, his face a mixture of surprise and hope. "I can't promise things will go back to the way they were," I warned him. "Our trust is broken. It will take time to heal, and I'm not even sure it can be healed. But I'm willing to try." "I'll do anything," Hunter replied immediately. "Taylor, I'll do anything." I took a deep breath before continuing. "I want to help your family. Instead of just giving money, I want to invest in the family business, help rebuild, and help you avoid bankruptcy." Hunter stared at me, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. "Taylor, I can't ask you to do something like that," he said, his voice trembling. "Considering everything we've done, something like this." I cut him off before he could finish. "I'm not asking," I said firmly. "This is my decision. But if we're going to do this, it will be on my terms," I added. "I will be involved in the company's financial decisions. And your entire family, especially your mother, will have to work to earn back my trust." Hunter nodded, tears welling in his eyes again. "Thank you, Taylor. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "I'm not doing this for you or your family," I said, my voice resolute. "I just want to do what's right. And I want to believe in second chances. I want to believe that the Hunter I once loved is still there, somewhere." The days and weeks that followed were a blur of activity. With Mr. Johnson's help, I structured an investment in the family business that would protect my interests. Hunter and his family cooperated fully, accepting my terms without hesitation. I noticed a change in Ellen, in particular. She worked harder than I'd ever seen her, dedicating long hours to the company, doing everything she could to show her gratitude and remorse. Little by little, things began to improve. The company showed signs of recovery, and with it, the family relationships started to heal as well. Hunter and I began the long process of rebuilding our relationship. Every day was a challenge. Doubts, fears, and anger sometimes resurfaced. But so did hope, forgiveness, and even new love. A year after the conflict, I found myself once again on the terrace of the beach house, watching the sunset dip into the ocean. But this time, I wasn't alone. Hunter stood beside me, his hand intertwined with mine. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. I smiled and gazed at the horizon. I was thinking about how much things have changed. How we nearly lost everything, and how we've found our way back. Hunter gripped my hand tightly. "I feel the same way, Taylor. Every day, I'm thankful for you, your strength, and your ability to forgive." I looked into his eyes. There was no mistaking the love and gratitude shining in them. "You know," I said softly, "I think your parents would be proud of you. Not just for how you handled their legacy, but for making the decision to use it to help the people we hurt. Your parents raised an incredible woman," Hunter said, pulling me closer. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, and the sky turned golden and pink, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. The journey had been filled with betrayal and pain, but there was also forgiveness, healing, and a new beginning. This house, and the inheritance from my parents, no longer stood as a symbol of conflict. It had become a symbol of forgiveness, growth, and a love that had been reborn. What had once been a source of bitterness and pain now held the promise of healing. I could feel it in the air, in the way we began to speak to each other, honestly, openly, without the weight of old resentments. For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed we were writing a new chapter of our lives. One that was built on trust, something we'd lost but now found again. As the first star appeared in the night sky, I knew deep down that we were on the right path. No matter what came our way, we were going to be all right. We had survived the worst of it. Somehow, together, we had become stronger. I thought back to the pain, the hurtful words, the nights I lay awake wondering if we could ever heal. Now, looking at the stars, I felt the weight of all that was behind me lifting. I wasn't the same person I had been before. The fear, the uncertainty, they were fading away. I had learned to forgive, to grow, and to love again. And somehow, the people around me had done the same. In the quiet of the night, with the soft breeze brushing against my skin, I realized we had made it through. Not unscathed, but stronger, more united. This was the life I had always hoped for, even when it seemed out of reach. I had made peace with my past, and in doing so, I had found a new sense of hope for the future.